into USask's NSERC USRA process for 2024 virtual session. My name is Mandy. I'm the coordinator for undergraduate research, scholarly, and artistic work. And this is one of the programs that I run here at the university. Before we get started, please type in the chat questions at any time. I'll make sure to pause after certain sections of the presentation just to see if there are any questions, but feel free to pop them into the chat at any time. If you prefer to, you can also put up your, turn your video on, put your hand up, and I can call on you to unmute or use the virtual hand. So I do like to start all of my presentations by acknowledging that we're on Treaty 6 territory and the traditional homeland of the Métis, or that's where I am today here at the university campus. You might be joining us from a different territory of Indigenous peoples. And I encourage you, if you are joining from a different location, to do some work to learn about whose territory you are on. I think that it's really important that we acknowledge the First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place and to reaffirm our relationships with each other. So what does that mean for undergraduate research? I think when we're thinking about research, scholarly or artistic work, that there's a process of learning and unlearning on how we can, have that work be committed to decolonization and to reconciliation. From my perspective, that means really emphasizing work that is led by Indigenous peoples and communities, and also committing to work that benefits and is accessible to those communities. And even though today we're talking about science and engineering, I think there is a lot that can be learned from Indigenous knowledges, Indigenous ways of knowing about the sciences and about engineering, and vice versa. There are incredible ways that research in the sciences and engineering can potentially benefit all of the communities in these lands. So just a little bit about my job first and why I'm running the NSERC USRA program, and then I will explain what that sort of jargony term means, what we mean by NSERC USRA, and give you all of the details about this year's application process, eligibility criteria, and make sure that we have time for questions. So my job is to run something called the Undergraduate Research Initiative. And the goal of that initiative is that every student, by the time you finish your undergraduate degree, no matter what you're studying, whether it's engineering or agriculture or education or arts and science, that you've had an authentic, mentored research, scholarly, or experience. So what does that mean and how do we do that? We work to provide those experiences in three main sort of components of your university life, providing in-class opportunities. If any of you have participated through the first year research experience or FIRE program in some of your first year classes. We also offer what we call co-curricular training through our student undergraduate research experience program and our summer symposium. So having workshops outside of class like you're participating in today to help support, building skills or providing information about opportunities so you can have those research experiences. And then the third way we try to promote students having these authentic, mentored research, scholarly, or artistic experiences is through student jobs. And one of the main ways we do that is running the undergraduate student research assistant program to distribute awards from Canada's tri-agency. So I'm just going to explain some of the terminology that we're using, explain what we mean by NSERC, what we mean by some of the other acronyms I'll be using today. For some of you, this may be very familiar information, but I know when I was an undergraduate student, I didn't learn about some of this until I was well into my fourth year. So Canada's tri-agency is sort of one of the major Canadian funding bodies for research. They fund research at all levels. So graduate students, your professors will typically apply to these agencies to fund their research projects. At the undergraduate level, NSERC, or the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council, is the main agency that provides funding for undergraduate students to be paid to do research work. So the tri-agency, the three agencies, there's NSERC, Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council. They fund research in the natural sciences and engineering. There is the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council, or SSHRC, and they fund research in the social sciences and humanities. And then finally, there are the Canadian Institutes of Health Research, and I'm guessing you can answer this question for me. They fund research in health research. So when it comes to undergraduate student research awards, there are 5 different awards, or I'm labeling them as 5 different awards that USask is offering this year. 3 of those awards are for NSERC awards, so for research being done in the natural sciences or engineering. So we have an NSERC USRA award. That is where we have 60 awards for any undergraduate student at USask to apply for to do research in the natural sciences or engineering. NSERC has also created 2 additional awards. One award is for Indigenous student researchers, and for the definition of this award, Indigenous students who are First Nations, Métis, or Inuit people of Canada to do research. And then there is a separate award that has been created for NSERC USRAs for Black student researchers for students that self-identify as Black. Additionally, we have 2 other awards. There is one SSHRC award for a Black student researcher studying in the social sciences or humanities, and there's one CIHR award for a Black student researcher studying health research. Great question. So can a Saskatchewan student studying out of province apply for this award? Absolutely. I'm going to get into the criteria of these awards right away. And one of the primary pieces of a criteria is that students have to be currently registered at a post-secondary institute at a university. So for our summer of 2024, no matter what USRA you're interested in applying for, if it's NSERC, if it's one of those SSHRCs or CIHR award, across the board, there are some sort of requirements for our process. All projects have to be supervised by a USask supervisor if you're applying to USask for one of these awards. And in fact, you put in your award application jointly with that supervisor. So that's going to be something that I come back to throughout our presentation today. The project that you're being awarded funding and paid to do has to be for 14 to 16 weeks of full-time work. And the University of Saskatchewan defines full-time work as 37.5 hours per week. So if you're in a situation where you're interested in this, but you have maybe travel plans and will only be available for 10 weeks, that's not long enough to qualify for one of these awards. These are paid awards, and this is paid work. So students that win these awards are paid for this opportunity. And so the payment is $14 to $16.96 per hour plus benefits. And how it works is NSERC provides $6,000 for the awards, and the rest of that award, to make sure you're being paid that appropriate wage, is paid for by the faculty supervisor. So again, why this really is an award that you apply for with a professor. And applications for this next cycle for summer 2024 are going to be due 11:59 p.m. on January 31st. So very, very end of January. So we're going to move into sort of the focus of the presentation. I'm going to talk about the eligibility for the award, the criteria that we receive from NSERC that students have to meet to qualify to apply for these awards and to hold these awards. I will speak to just a little bit of how you find that faculty supervisor. We also have a session planned for next week that will go more in depth on that very important step. And then finally, I'll speak about how you actually apply, what the application process looks like for this year, because we have made changes. So if in the past you've applied for an NSERC USRA, our application process this year is going to look a little bit differently. So this is where I see the question in the chat, are international students allowed to work those hours? And actually, this is an award that to qualify for, you have to be either a Canadian citizen, a permanent resident, or have protected status. So these awards will not fund international students. That's the first criteria that we have from our funding agencies. Additional criteria, students must be registered in a bachelor's degree program when they apply at the end of January. Students must have an average of at least a B- or a 70. But NSERC does have some flexibility there. So if your cumulative average is lower, but over the last 2 years, you've shown a lot of improvement and it's a 70 or above, you could still be eligible to apply for one of these awards. Students applying for an NSERC award, so that Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council, cannot be enrolled in an undergraduate professional degree program in the health sciences. So if you are a student in an MD program or a dentistry program or a Bachelor of Science in Nursing program, you do not qualify for an NSERC award. You could still qualify for that Canadian Institutes of Health Research Award for Black student researchers if you self-identify as Black. So there's some exceptions to some of the eligibility criteria. Students to qualify for these awards cannot have been registered at any time in a graduate program in the same field of study. And so what that means is if you were applying for an NSERC, you cannot have at any time been registered in a graduate program in the natural sciences or engineering. So even if, for instance, you have a bachelor, you started a master's degree in, let's say, geology, and now you're back doing an undergraduate degree in engineering, you wouldn't qualify for these awards because you had already started graduate level study under that sort of broad umbrella of natural sciences and engineering research. Where it gets a little bit messy is you could have started graduate studies in, let's say, the humanities or the social sciences. You would still be qualified for an NSERC if, let's say, now you're registered in an undergraduate program in the sciences. You can only hold one NSERC USRA per fiscal year, and you can only hold 3 NSERC USRAs in your entire undergrad career. You are able to apply for an NSERC USRA if you already have a bachelor's degree, and this is maybe your second or your third degree, as long as over that entire career, you have held no more than 3 of these awards. And so can you apply if you're a first-year student? You can, as long as you're registered in January, and to hold the award, you will have to successfully complete your second semester next term. So where that could become complicated is if you're a first-year student, if you're not registered this semester and next term was your first term, then you wouldn't be able to apply for the award. But if you're registered for this term, finish all your classes, and you're registered next term, you could apply for the award. And then we just have to verify that you've completed your second term so that you can hold that award in the summer. Relatedly, if right now you're in your 4th year or your 5th year and you're finishing up your degree, you're going to convocate in the spring, you could still hold this award. You would be a student in January when you apply, and then you would no longer be an undergraduate student in the summer when you hold the award. Students are expected to engage in this work on a full-time basis, doing the sort of the research for their project or related developmental activities. So really what that means is, because the award is to do 37.5 hours a week of research work, there are limits on, for instance, how many courses students can take. According to NSERC, you can take up to a max of 2 courses for the whole summer, but that would also need to be negotiated with that faculty supervisor. And then just to emphasize it again, the project that the award is for has to be for 14 to 16 weeks of full-time work. Some additional criteria for the awards for Black student researchers. So students who want to apply for the NSERC USRA for Black student researchers, or the CIHR or SSHRC USRAs for Black student researchers. Those awards are only for Black students. And by applying for those awards, students are sort of self-identifying as Black and giving their consent that if they are given that award, that information would be shared with our funders and publicly. For the NSERC USRA for Indigenous student researchers, again, that award is only for Indigenous students and only for First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples of Canada is how Indigenous is defined for that specific award. To qualify for that award, to hold that award, students have to follow our Debewayan or truth policy that the university has. So there's links that we will have on our website to sort of submit the documentation to the university for your membership or citizenship to be verified, and having that verification is a condition of holding the award. If you haven't done that process yet, you can still apply for the award. It will just be a requirement for you to hold the award. Are there any questions about eligibility for these awards before we start digging into how to find a supervisor? And I can just maybe expand a bit. So how USRAs work is they are administered by the different universities. So NSERC gives a certain amount of awards to each university, and each university has slightly different processes, timelines for applying for these awards. As a student, you can apply to a different university if there was a professor there that was willing to work with you. But to do that, you would have to follow that university's process and confirm that they're accepting students from other universities. Some universities either don't accept other students or they prioritize their own students in these competitions. Relatedly, if you want to apply to the U of S for an NSERC USRA to work with a professor here, you go through our process that I'll be explaining today. So a lot of what I speak to is specific for USask students, but you can be a student at another university. You just have to currently be registered in January. So finding a supervisor. And this is really the first big step. Once you sort of confirm, okay, I think I'm eligible for this award. I think I know which awards is the best fit for me. The big piece is to find that supervisor. And we are having some sessions next week that will dig in with a bit more detail and support when we have a full hour to talk about this. But today I still wanted to go over some of the key points. The main point is that supervisor is going to basically write the application with you. A key part of the application and what we adjudicate is actually submitted by that supervisor. And just to get to the question in the chat about, so are the students applying the one responsible to suggest the research proposal? They are not helping a prof in their research. And it's actually a bit more complex. So for these awards, we want you as a student to have a clearly defined research project. But sometimes and often, I would say, that research project is part of a larger research project that a professor at the university is working on. And if you think about it, because part of the money for your award is being paid for by that professor, it makes sense that sort of your piece of summer research work would be connected to their research. And so that's where, as soon as possible, if this is something you're interested in, you want to start thinking about who might be a good professor for me to work with and to start approaching some of those folks to see if they are interested in working with you, if they have capacity to take on students for the summer, and to complete an application for an NSERC USRA with you. So to prepare for that, you're going to want to sort of confirm you're eligible, know which award is the right fit for you. If you have questions, if you're not sure, I don't know if I'm eligible or I don't know which award would be best, that's where you can reach out to me. And then what you're going to want to do is do a bit of research actually on your professors, find out, which professors have interests that are similar to your own, and try to find a professor who is conducting research that you're interested in, and or a professor that you think would be a really good mentor. I am always going to recommend starting with the professors that you already know. So if there's someone you've taken a class with and you really liked their class, you liked how they taught, or maybe when they talked about their own research, you thought it was really interesting and exciting, those can be great people to talk to first. It's also a little bit less scary because you're not emailing an absolute stranger. But for this process, it is sort of the student's responsibility to reach out to a professor. And then if you have a professor that says, okay, I'm willing to work on this application with you, you submit the application together. And you may have to reach out to more than one professor. That might be a process that takes a little bit of time to find that right match. I do also want to emphasize, and this is something that is good to discuss with that faculty member, is a professor might agree and say, okay, I think you'd be a great student in my lab. I'm going to complete this application with you. Sometimes having that job for the summer in the lab is contingent on being successful in getting the NSERC USRA or the SSHRC USRA or CIHR USRA. So I would recommend having a very direct conversation with that professor to make sure that you understand, is this a summer job opportunity only if I'm successful with the NSERC USRA, or would there be a different opportunity if you are not successful? And that's going to completely depend on the professor and what type of funding they have available to hire students. So just to sort of summarize, start with who you know. Think about your research interests, what you like learning in school, and trying to find a professor whose research matches that. But also think about who might be a really good mentor for you for where you're at in your research journey. And I'm seeing a question in the chat. It's okay if you don't have previous research experience. Absolutely. One thing about an undergraduate student research assistant position and these awards is that this is typically where we start, right? And we usually start with no experience, but by the time you finish your undergraduate degree, you will have that experience. Give yourself lots of time for this step. I know classes are wrapping up and exam period can be intense, but if you do have time, sort of over December or even into early January, this is where you really want to start researching and reaching out to professors so you can find that match and you can start working on the application together. Again, you're going to want to be really prepared when you reach out to that professor. You want to sort of have a sense of what their research is, if they have a lab, to be able to tell them why you would want to work with them versus someone else. But also be prepared to have things like an updated resume that you could share with them or to let them know how your grades are. Be prepared to maybe go for a meeting with them to talk about how you might work together. This is really about a job, so we also want to be quite formal and professional in our communications. Again, if you're starting with someone you know, you can potentially, maybe stop by their office hour or chat with them after class tomorrow if you have class tomorrow. But even if you do that, you'll definitely want to send a follow-up email and just have it be very formal, very, very polite. Typically, too, students will just email a professor rather than showing up if they haven't met them before. And you can attend our How to Talk to a Professor session next week for more tips and tricks on what that looks like, what an email template might look like, how to sort of do these steps in more detail. And I will pop the links if you want to sign up for those events just into the chat. If you give me one moment. So next week, we are having an in-person session and a virtual session. I think the in-person session is Tuesday at noon, and the virtual session is Thursday at 4:30 p.m. Trying to find different times with exams. If you come to the in-person session, I'll have pizza and food, so it could be maybe a little study break. And we will be recording the virtual session as well. So if you have all finals next week or just stressed with studying, you'll still be able to catch a recording of the presentation. Any questions about finding a supervisor? Awesome. So the recording versions will all be posted to our webpage, which has just recently been updated. So I will pop that link for us as well. Alrighty. I'll just do it once we get through things. Okay, so does USask have a website of principal investigators doing research? So on the USask website, you can look up usually by department, different faculty, and it can really vary from faculty to faculty how much information they have. But most professors will have a small blurb about the research they're doing. Some will have more details or even their own websites for their labs. There's not like a single list, but I would start with your department, with your college, and then just look up those faculty profiles, and then that will take you typically to an easy way to find a bit more information about the specific research that different professors do. So for our application, I have made some changes. I'm just going to copy and paste again. I'm going to move that. Get rid of the chat for a second. We've just updated our website, so I'm going to pop that link into the chat, and then you're welcome to sort of follow along a bit or find the forms, and hopefully everything will be clear as mud, or even clearer. So I think that, oh, didn't include the link. We'll try again. I've got the link at the end of my presentation too, where you can just easily click on a QR code, but I'll see if I can bring up a working link for you here. And great question. So how competitive are these awards? Last year, so it depends which awards you're applying for. For the regular USask NSERC USRA award, we have 60 awards for the whole university. Last year, we had 146 students apply. So it was a fairly competitive process. Some of the things so that we're working on this year, and this is a great segue into our application process, is to really help you as a student to sort of know what our adjudicators are looking for, to hopefully make it not necessarily easier. I think there's still a lot of work involved in this application, but to make it clearer, so you can be really strategic with your time, and with preparing as strong of an application as possible. We've also taken some steps to make it less sort of administratively burdensome for you. So hopefully things like submitting the application are easier than in previous years. So our big changes for this year is you will be submitting your application through a Canvas course. I've created a Canvas course for each of our 5 awards. On our webpage, you will be able to click a link to self-enroll in the course for the award that you want to apply for, and you will upload your application as an assignment into that Canvas course. Another change for this year is students do not have to pay for or provide their USask transcripts. I will provide those for you. However, if you have attended another university, you will need to provide us and upload the official transcripts from that university, and any sort of other university that you've attended. We've also consolidated our application forms. So if you've only been to the U of S, you will need to submit 2 forms, one that you fill out as the student and one that your faculty supervisor fills out. And you will submit both of those forms into our Canvas page. If you applied last year we introduced a statement of interest that students had to complete. We still have that as part of our student form, but we've broken that statement down into more specific questions to provide more prompts and guidance for the type of information that we're looking for. And our final change for this year is we've built out a more detailed rubric. So you as a student, you can go into Canvas. It's also on our webpage. You'll be able to see sort of how we're adjudicating each component, as well as how the different components are weighted. And I didn't put the rubric on a slide because it's a bit of a beast, but you'll be able to see it in the Canvas courses and on our website. So just sort of digging in a bit to just get into that Canvas course, you'll go to our website, you'll go to the apply section, you'll pick the award you want to apply for and click on the button sort of that says like apply here, and then it will take you to self-enroll in one of the Canvas courses. On the screen, you can see what the Canvas course looks like for the NSERC USRA award. You can confirm that this is the right award, and it has all of the information of what you will need to submit and where to find more information. And the assignment will be due at 11:59 p.m. on January 31st, 2024. If you go into the assignment portion, and hopefully this is familiar from your classes, you will see a sort of our one assignment. This is where you submit your forms. You will need to submit both forms into sort of one submission of the assignment. If you haven't done the like add another file before in a class, we've got an instructional video on how to do that. You'll also be able to see the super detailed rubric in the assignment. And you can enroll in the class right now. Yes, everything is live. You can go to our website and click on the class you want to enroll in. So again, the application, we've got 2 forms. The form that you fill out is combining what last year would have been 2 forms. So it includes info related to your eligibility for the award and your contact information. There's a space on the form for you to list all of the awards that you have won. We aren't limiting the number of awards you can list this year, and I would encourage you to really be thorough, right? If you received an entrance scholarship, add that. If you've received, even if it's a little, $350, $400 award, list the award. part of the purpose of listing awards is to show a bigger picture of your academic potential, of your academic excellence. And so being able to see all of the awards, not just what you would consider the big awards, is what we're looking for. Also, though, if you have won big awards, if you've held an undergraduate student research assistantship in NSERC USRA before, make sure that you include those awards as well. Even though my office runs the NSERC USRA program, I'm not digging into files to see, oh, did this student have an award they didn't put on their application? You need to put everything into that application to make it as strong as possible. And then just that last year's statement of interest, there are 3 questions that you will be answering, worth 10% each. And there's an optional 4th question that I would encourage you to answer that is going to help our adjudicators to understand the bigger picture of sort of your academic story, to understand your performance in your classes. And then there's the form your faculty supervisor fills out. They will give that form to you and you will submit it to Canvas as part of the assignment. Okay, and that's a great question. So how do you come up with a research proposal once you read a professor's work? So once you find a professor and you're like, oh, I'm really interested in your work, that's where you need to contact that person. So sending them a formal email, asking if they'd be interested in working with you, or doing an application for an NSERC USRA. And then if that professor says, okay, yeah, I'm interested in working with you, they might not, right? Sometimes the first person who reaches out to says, hey, like I don't have time this summer, or maybe I'm on sabbatical, and you need to reach out to a different professor. But let's say they say yes, then you will work with them on the proposal. It is in the professor's part of the application where they write what your research project will look like. And most professors have something in mind, right? So how much, how involved you are in crafting that research proposal, I think will really depend on the professor that you're working with. My sense, though, is that often the professor, might say, hey, here's what I can offer you, right? And they will craft that part. But there are instances where things are more collaborative. That's where it's just really going to depend on who you're working with. And again, why reaching out early is going to help in case there does need to be a lot of back and forth, or if you need to go to a couple of faculty members to find someone. So the part of the application where you have the most control is in that student application form. Even though you fill this out, it's always great if your faculty supervisor has time to have them read over your answers and to prepare some time for maybe incorporating their feedback if that's something that they have time to provide. So the 3 questions you need to answer, and this is going to get at that question of, do you need previous research experience? So the first question is all about what experiences you would bring or skills that you have that would support you to complete this summer project. And we've been very purposeful in making that question broad because we want it to be fair for students that maybe they've already spent 2 summers working in a lab doing research. But we also want this to be fair to students that have never been in a lab before. They've never worked as a student assistant doing research work for the summer. So that's where, depending on your experience, you'll need to work to craft an answer that explains what do you bring, and maybe that ends up being skills that you've built in your courses or skills related to other work that you've done, communication skills that are going to help you with your project. And I am planning a session for January to talk about and give a bit more guidance and support for students on how do we identify what skills we have and how do we write about them in an application. Question number 2 is really about what skills is this opportunity going to help you to practice and develop? Because we really want these opportunities to be places of growth, right? So that's where, again, that connection between you and your faculty supervisor is going to be really important so that your answer is very specific to the project that is being proposed for you. Our third question is getting at that why and how is this opportunity going to contribute to either your future education or career? And I should say too, we're not looking for an answer of I want to be a researcher and I want to go to grad school. You could write a very strong answer about not quite maybe knowing what your career goals are yet, but explaining how this research opportunity is going to help you to determine that or clarify things with more detail than my example answer. And then our fourth optional question is really just giving more information about your academic performance, anything else that you would like the adjudicators to know to help them to contextualize your grades. The adjudicators will be looking at your cumulative average, your average by year, and they'll have your transcript so they can dig in and see sort of how you've performed in different classes. But we also wanted students to have an opportunity to potentially explain any lower grades. I know oftentimes students, especially in their first year, might have a rough year and might not get the best grades, but they've shown improvement by the time they get to third or fourth year. So this question is optional, but it is really that opportunity to help the adjudicators to better understand your academic story. And even if, let's say, you haven't maybe struggled with your grades, it can be a chance to give them that context of, hey, I've maintained excellent grades, in addition to maybe having family responsibilities or working or having a lot of extracurricular activities, just so they can help to sort of understand what those numbers mean for you as a person. So our weighting. Academic potential, this is sort of the grades, but also improvement, awards, that context you can provide, as well as information from colleges and departments. That's going to be used to assess academic potential, and that's worth 30% of the scoring. 40% of the scoring is based on the professor's form, the faculty application form, where they talk about what the project will be, what skills you will be building, and how they will be mentoring you. And then the final 30% is based on your answers to those three questions. And we're using that to assess your research potential. And again, really trying to frame those questions so they could be answerable if you have no research experience so far. This is maybe the first time you're applying for this type of opportunity, or if this is your third time applying for this type of opportunity and you're bringing a lot of experience to it and hopefully using this opportunity to continue to grow your experience. All right, so does all research have to be on campus or can you work virtually with a professor on a project? And that's really going to be a question for the professor. In fact, sometimes research is in the field, right? Sometimes research in the natural sciences, like in geology, takes place in the field. So it might not be in Saskatoon. It really depends on the professor and on the project that you're doing, where you would need to be located. But that is definitely a conversation to have with that professor and to understand their expectations. Are they expecting that you're on campus for that full 37.5 hours, or are they open to some of that time being spent elsewhere? And it'll depend on the project as well. Sometimes these research projects require that in-person work. Often they do. So results and requirements for students. Because we're using Canvas, all students will be notified of their results. So we won't just be contacting the successful students. Everyone will know their results. We're targeting the February break for getting that information to you. I'm trying to give you as much time as possible to complete the application, but also making sure that we're letting you know as soon as possible about these jobs so you can make appropriate plans for your summer. Some students will be told that they've been waitlisted. And what that means is that you aren't guaranteed an award. But if someone that we've offered an award to ends up declining it because maybe their summer plans have changed, you could still be offered an award. And we will let those students know in early March if they are receiving an award. I like to provide that date too, just so you can start to make your plans appropriately. All students will receive their score and see how they scored in the rubric, so you'll be getting some feedback on your application. And I should say too, there's a question about sort of how competitive these are. These can be very competitive awards. And so if you aren't successful this year, even if some of your scoring is maybe saying good or needs improvement, that's very much in the context of an award where almost everyone applying to it is exceptional, right? And we're trying to grade it, we're trying to evaluate it fairly. But please do not feel if you're not successful this year in this cycle, please don't feel that that means you're not an excellent student or an excellent candidate for research, because these can be very competitive awards. If you are successful this year, there will be some required next steps. So you will have to submit your application through the NSERC portal with your professor. But because we're doing this the way we are this year, I'll be able to help you with that. We'll have some workshops and supports to help you to create your online account and just to figure out the nuances of getting those forms submitted. But that will absolutely be a requirement. If you are awarded this award and for some reason don't submit it to the NSERC portal, you will not receive your funding for the summer. And then finally, and this isn't just for successful students, anyone can, but we will sign up all of the students being awarded NSERC USRAs, as well as the CIHR and SSHRC USRA for our Student Undergraduate Research Experience newsletter. That's where you'll find out about events that I'm hosting over the summer to help to give you that extra support for your student research work. You will also be expected to attend some of those workshops, again, with the goal of helping you to build your skills and to feel supported in your role. If you are not successful, you can still sign up for our newsletter and you can still come to these workshops. They are open to any undergraduate student. So as we get into this process, I encourage you to sort of review the materials on our webpage, get yourself into those courses, look at those forms, let me know if you have questions. But I do want to provide support for you throughout this process. So next week we have 2 sessions. They're exactly the same. The only difference is one is in person with pizza and one is virtual and will be recorded. So those sessions are really digging into the how do you talk to a professor about a research position, and having time for asking questions and getting advice and tips and practicing sort of that step, which is our really first big step if this is a process that you want to participate in. I'm also planning a session for early January. I haven't picked a date yet, but we'll hopefully get that information out to you soon, about identifying and writing about research skills for your applications. I think this session will be really helpful if you want to apply for one of the tri-agencies USRAs, but it's also going to be a skill that will help with other award applications and even job applications, because it's essentially working on that cover letter skill as well as your application skills. And then finally in January, we will be having some sessions where I'll book a space, there will be food, and you can stop in if you have questions, or you can just sit and work for a couple of hours on your application, but in a space where there are staff and people that you can come to with questions to give you that extra support. And I will bribe you with food to make it sort of fun, hopefully. Relatedly, if there's something that you think would be helpful for you, you're not seeing it on my planned list of events, please send me a message, send me an email. I do want to make sure that you feel supported throughout this application process. So we've got about 10 minutes. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm just going to I'll flip to the last slide so you can get my contact information. And if you couldn't get the link to work, you can get the website. But then I'll stop sharing my screen and just see if there are any questions from anyone on our call. So if you have a question, take a moment to think, type it in the chat. Can I reach out to profs during the Christmas break? So campus does shut down for those 3 days between Boxing Day and New Year's. If possible, I would try to reach out to them before December 23rd. Even if it's just sort of that email getting things in motion, you might not be able to meet them until early January. But if you do have capacity, I think reaching out over exam period would be perfectly acceptable. If you don't have time, you're just like, I have exams and assignments and need to study, reaching out very early in January. I think the university is open again on like the 2nd or the 3rd is when I'd start emailing folks just to make sure you still have that time to secure a faculty supervisor, because that might not be the first person you approach, and that you have time for that application. Does it affect my application if I don't have any awards but a good GPA? I think depending on the strength of the GPA, I wouldn't worry about it. But that is where we do want you to think about any awards, right, that you've received. Like if you got a $400 entrance scholarship, put it down. If you're in like the Golden Key Honor Society, put it down. Just thinking really any awards to make sure to document that. You can also document things in that paragraph where you could say, hey, like I have a good GPA and here's some context of the other things that I've been doing, and really emphasizing for those adjudicators what you think is strong about your academic performance. Okay, so where can you see the office hours of the profs if you're not a USask student, you're an out-of-province student? So that's where, to be honest, I would probably just start with an email to them. Lots of times profs here vary in terms of their office hours, and now that we're in exam period, it might be different. So I would, if there's a professor you're interested in working with, send them that introductory email. Also, if you are not a USask student, please email me about what your application process will look like, because you have to sign up for the sort of the Canvas courses as I've set them up. You do have to be a USask student. If you're not a USask student, you would fill out the same forms, but how you would submit them would be a bit different. So please do email me. Any other questions, comments? Well, thank you so much for joining me. I know it's a busy time of year. Please do email me at any time if you have questions. Reach out if, a couple hours later, tomorrow, you're like, oh, I should have asked this. My job is to help to support you through this process. Sometimes I am slow on my email or things get lost. So if, it's been a day or two and I haven't replied, please just send me a gentle reminder and say, hey, Mandy, you didn't get back to my email, and I will apologize and get back to your email. Yes, thank you so much. If you do want to, I'm going to stop the recording, but I'll stay on the call